On the day, Chief Akinwale gathered the elders to hand his wealth to his only son. The meeting ended in a silence so heavy that no man spoke for a long time. Before the kola nut was broken, and before blessings could be given, the young man stepped forward and said, "Father, I refuse this inheritance, because it is not the life chosen for me." The elders stared at him as if he had spoken against the ancestors, and one of them warned that such words could destroy a man's future. Chief Akinwale struck the earth with his staff, and declared that a son who rejects wealth invites hardship with his own hands. Adwale did not bow or withdraw his words, and the people began to whisper, because they saw that something stronger than fear was pushing him toward a path no one understood. Chief Akinwale stood up slowly and faced his son with anger that shook his voice. He said no child born under his roof had ever insulted him before the elders. Adwale answered that he meant no insult, but could not accept a life that did not belong to him. One elder said, "A young man who rejects guidance walks towards suffering with open eyes." Adwale replied, "That suffering on the right path is better than comfort on the wrong one." His mother rose from her seat and held his arm with both hands. She begged him to remember the labor that built the house he now wished to leave. Adwale spoke gently and said he honored his parents, but must still obey the voice within him. She said, "Destiny does not require a man to abandon his people." Adwale answered that sometimes a man must walk away before he can truly return. Chief Akinwale pointed toward the compound gate, and said the road outside would show him the meaning of hunger. He declared that a son who rejects protection must survive without it. Adwale said he accepted those conditions without complaint. The chief warned him never to return, asking for help. Adwale promised he would return only when his life had found its purpose. The elders ended the meeting without blessings, because none knew what to say. Adwale went into his room and removed the expensive garments he had worn during the gathering. He chose simple clothes he once used during visits to the farms. He placed one spare cloth and his grandmother's bead bracelet into a small bag. The bracelet was the only gift she had given him before her death. When he stepped outside, the servants avoided his eyes because they feared the chief's anger. The driver approached and asked if he should prepare the car. Adwale said the journey before him could not be traveled by car. The gatekeeper opened the iron gate and asked quietly if his parents knew he was leaving. Adwale answered that his father himself had shown him the way. The gatekeeper warned that the world outside the compound does not honor a man because of his birth. Adwale said he wished to be known by his deeds, and not by his father's name. The gate closed behind him with a loud sound that seemed to end his former life. He walked forward without turning his head. Each step carried him farther from the protection he had always known. Before noon, the whole town knew that the chief's son had abandoned his inheritance. Some said pride had entered his heart and driven out wisdom. Others believed unseen forces were guiding him toward trouble. The elders said destiny sometimes pushes a man where advice cannot reach him. Adwale continued walking until his legs began to tremble. By evening, he reached a small farming village where people were returning from their fields. Children gathered around him because his manners showed he came from a wealthy home. An old farmer called him and asked what business had brought him there. Adwale answered that he was searching for the work meant for his life. The farmer said many men seek work, but few seek destiny. The farmer allowed him to sleep in an empty hut at the edge of the village. The mat was rough, and sleep came slowly to him. Hunger troubled him, yet he refused to regret his decision. He remembered his grandmother saying that comfort hides the path from careless eyes. Those words gave him strength to endure the night. Before sunrise, the farmer woke him and handed him a hoe. He said a man who seeks destiny must first test his strength against the earth. Adwale followed him to the farm and worked until sweat covered his body. His hands blistered and pain spread across his back. Still, he continued because he feared weakness more than hardship. At midday they rested and shared a small meal. The farmer said Adwale's hands showed he was not born to farm work. Adwale agreed and said he was searching for another path. The farmer said, "Wisdom begins when a man knows what he is not." Adwale listened carefully and kept the words in his mind. That evening the farmer spoke of a shrine beyond the river where a priest understood matters of destiny. Adwale asked if the priest could reveal the purpose of his life. The farmer said destiny is not spoken like ordinary news but discovered through trials. Adwale accepted this and prepared to leave the next morning. He knew the search had only begun. At sunrise they walked together to the river. When they reached the crossing, the farmer stopped and refused to continue. He said a man must meet destiny alone, without witnesses. Aidwale thanked him and crossed the river slowly. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. As he approached the shrine, a voice called from inside before he spoke. The voice said it had been waiting for the son who rejected wealth. Aidwale stopped because no one there knew his story. The priest stepped outside and looked at him without greeting. Then he said the first test would begin before sunset, and Aidwale wondered whether destiny would accept him or break him. The priest studied Aidwale for a long time before speaking again. He said, "Many young men come to the shrine asking for destiny, but few remain when the price is revealed." Aidwale answered that he had already abandoned wealth and comfort and would not turn back now. The priest said abandoning wealth is only the beginning of a man's testing. He warned that destiny demands obedience before it gives direction. The priest led Aidwale into the inner room of the shrine and closed the door behind them. He said the first trial required patience and truthfulness above all things. Aidwale listened carefully because he feared making a mistake at the beginning of his journey. The priest placed a small covered calabash into his hands and told him to guard it through the night. He warned that Aidwale must not open it, no matter what he heard or imagined. Aidwale asked what was inside the calabash and why it must remain closed. The priest answered that a man who cannot obey a simple command cannot carry a difficult destiny. He said Aidwale must sit alone until sunrise while holding the calabash. Aidwale agreed and promised not to break the instruction. The priest left him alone and barred the door from outside. At first the room was quiet, and Aidwale sat patiently with the calabash on his lap. After some time he heard a faint knocking sound from inside it. The sound stopped and then returned louder than before. Aidwale remembered the priest's warning and forced himself to remain still. He said to himself that a man who rejects wealth must not be defeated by curiosity. The knocking became a soft voice, calling his name slowly. It said he should open the calabash and see what had been prepared for him. Aidwale pressed his hands tightly against the lid and shook his head. He said, "Destiny does not hide inside forbidden things." The voice fell silent for a while, and he believed the testing might be over. Later he heard a different voice that sounded like his mother's voice. It begged him to return home and stop suffering for nothing. Aidwale's heart trembled because he knew the pain he had caused her. Still, he refused to open the calabash because he remembered his promise. He said a man who breaks his word destroys his own path. The voice changed again and sounded like his father's voice filled with anger. It said the inheritance would be given to another if he did not return quickly. Aidwale felt fear that he might lose everything forever. Then he reminded himself that he had already rejected those things willingly. He held the calabash tighter and waited for morning. Before dawn, the voices stopped and silence returned. Aidwale remained awake because he feared the final hours might be the hardest. When sunlight entered through a small opening, the priest returned and opened the door. Aidwale handed back the calabash without speaking. The priest examined his face carefully before nodding. The priest said Aidwale had passed the first test because he obeyed instructions even when troubled. Aidwale asked what had truly been inside the calabash. The priest answered that it contained nothing except the weakness that lives inside every man. He said, "A man who conquers himself can begin to approach destiny." Aidwale felt relief, but knew harder trials must still come. The priest told him the second test would not be as simple as sitting in one place. He said Aidwale must travel to a distant village and settle a dispute between two brothers. Aidwale was surprised and said he had no authority to judge others. The priest answered that destiny often begins with service to strangers. He said Aidwale must leave immediately. Aidwale prepared for the journey without argument. The priest said he must listen more than he speaks and judge without selfishness. Aidwale promised to follow the instruction carefully. The priest warned that failure would send him back to the life he had abandoned. Aidwale accepted the warning and began the journey. After many hours he reached the village and found the two brothers waiting with angry faces. Each one claimed their father's land belonged entirely to him. The villagers gathered around because they wanted the matter settled quickly. Aidwale listened as both men spoke with bitterness. He realized that one decision would create peace, while the other would deepen hatred. When evening approached, the brothers demanded that Aidwale give judgment without delay. He knew that a careless decision could destroy the family forever. He also knew that returning to the shrine without resolving the matter would mean failure. As he prepared to speak, Aidwale wondered whether wisdom would guide his tongue or leave him alone before the watching crowd. The villagers waited in silence while Aidwale considered the words of the two brothers. The elder brother insisted the land belonged to him because he had worked beside their father for many years. The younger brother argued that their father had promised to divide the land equally before his death. Aidwale listened without interruption because he remembered the priest's instruction. He knew that careless speech could destroy the peace of the village. After a long silence, Aidwale asked both brothers to walk with him to the disputed land. The villagers followed closely because they wished to hear the final decision. When they arrived, Aidwale examined the farms and the boundaries marked by old stones. He asked questions about their father's life and the labor each brother had given. The answers revealed both effort and resentment between them. Aidwale asked if their father had left any witnesses to his final wishes. The elder brother said no witnesses had been present when their father spoke with him. The younger brother also admitted he had no witnesses to support his claim. The villagers began to murmur because the truth seemed hidden from all of them. Aidwale understood that judgment without fairness would create lasting bitterness. He said the land would be divided into 2 equal parts, beginning from the oldest boundary stone. The elder brother protested loudly and said equal sharing would ignore his years of labor. Aidwale answered that labor builds a farm, but blood builds a family. He said a brother is more valuable than land that can be lost or destroyed. The villagers nodded because the words carried wisdom. The younger brother accepted the decision, but the elder brother remained angry. Aidwale told him that a man who holds land but loses his brother holds nothing of value. The elder brother stood in silence for a long time before speaking. Finally, he said he would accept the judgment for the sake of peace. The villagers praised the decision and declared the matter settled. That evening, the two brothers prepared food and invited Aidwale to share their meal. They thanked him for restoring peace between them and promised to honor the decision. Aidwale felt relief because he had feared making a wrong judgment. He realized that guiding others carried a heavy burden. The villagers said the ancestors must have guided his words. Early the next morning, Aidwale prepared to return to the shrine. The younger brother walked with him part of the way and spoke with gratitude. He said many elders had tried to settle the dispute without success. Aidwale answered that wisdom belongs to those who listen carefully. Then he continued the journey alone. When Aidwale reached the shrine, the priest was waiting outside as if he already knew the outcome. Aidwale reported everything exactly as it had happened. The priest listened without interruption and then nodded slowly. He said Aidwale had chosen peace instead of pride. Aidwale felt encouraged by the approval. The priest said the second test had shown that Aidwale could guide others. He said destiny requires a man to serve people before he can lead them. Aidwale asked what task still remained before his path would be revealed. The priest answered that the final trial would test his heart rather than his mind. Aidwale listened with seriousness because he sensed the difficulty ahead. The priest explained that Aidwale must return to his father's town. Aidwale was troubled and asked why he must go back after leaving so firmly. The priest said a man cannot run away from the roots that gave him life. Aidwale feared facing his father's anger again. Still, he agreed to obey the instruction. The priest told him that he must enter the town quietly and observe without announcing himself. He said Aidwale must discover what trouble had risen in his absence. Aidwale promised to follow the instructions carefully. The priest warned that what he found might test his courage. Aidwale prepared himself for the journey. After leaving the shrine, Aidwale traveled steadily toward his home. Memories returned with every step along the familiar road. He wondered whether his parents would receive him with anger or silence. He also wondered what kind of trouble could be waiting for him. When the town finally appeared ahead, Aidwale slowed his steps and prepared himself for whatever destiny had arranged. Aidwale entered the town quietly as the priest had instructed. He covered his head with a cloth so that people would not recognize him. The streets felt familiar, yet he walked like a stranger among those who once knew him. He listened carefully to conversations as he passed by. Small groups of people. Soon he began to hear troubling words, repeated in many places. People were saying that Chief Akinwale had fallen seriously ill. Some said the chief no longer left his room and spoke very little. Others said relatives had begun to argue over property while the chief was still alive. Aidwale felt pain hearing these stories, but kept his identity hidden. He continued listening because he believed the truth would reveal itself slowly. Near the marketplace he heard two men speaking in low voices. They said a distant cousin had moved into the chief's compound and taken control of many affairs. One man said the cousin claimed he was protecting the property until the chief recovered. The other man said the cousin behaved like a man who expected to inherit everything. Aidwale understood that trouble had entered his father's house. As evening approached, Aidwale walked toward the compound where he had once lived. He stopped at a distance and watched the gate carefully. The guards standing there were men he did not recognize. He realized that new authority had replaced the old order. This discovery filled him with concern. He approached the gate slowly and greeted the guards politely. They asked his business in a cold manner that showed no respect. Aidwale said he had come to deliver a message to the chief. One guard said the chief was too sick to receive strangers. Aidwale asked if any member of the family could hear the message. The guards laughed and said messages could be delivered to the new master of the house. Aidwale asked who held such authority. The guard answered that Chief Akinwale's cousin now directed all matters. Aidwale felt anger rise within him, but forced himself to remain calm. He thanked the guards and walked away without argument. That night, Aidwale slept in the house of an old servant who recognized him. The servant wept when he saw Aidwale and spoke of the disorder in the household. He said the cousin had dismissed loyal workers and replaced them with his own men. He also said the chief's sickness had grown worse because of constant worry. Aidwale listened with a heavy heart. The servant urged Aidwale to reveal himself immediately. Aidwale said he must first understand the situation completely. He explained that he had come under instruction and must act carefully. The servant agreed, but warned that delay might bring greater harm. Aidwale promised he would not remain silent for long. The next day, Aidwale returned near the compound and watched again. He saw the cousin giving orders in the courtyard like the true owner. Servants moved quickly to obey him, while others avoided his presence. Aidwale realized that power had already begun to shift. He understood that waiting too long could cost his father everything. That evening, Aidwale decided to reveal himself. He walked to the gate and spoke firmly to the guards. He said he was Aidwale, the son of Chief Akinwale, and demanded entry. The guards hesitated because they had heard stories about him. One of them went inside to report his arrival. After some time, the cousin came out with a suspicious expression. He greeted Aidwale with forced politeness and asked why he had returned. Aidwale answered that he had come to see his father. The cousin said the chief needed rest and could not receive visitors. Aidwale insisted that a son is not a visitor in his father's house. The cousin finally allowed him inside, but watched him closely. Aidwale went directly to his father's room. The chief lay weak and silent on the bed. When Aidwale spoke his name, the chief opened his eyes slowly. Recognition came after a moment, and tears gathered in the old man's eyes. Chief Akinwale said he believed he would die before seeing his son again. Aidwale knelt beside him and asked forgiveness for the pain he had caused. The chief said hardship teaches lessons that comfort hides. Aidwale promised he had not returned for wealth. The chief said he already understood that truth. Before Aidwale left the room, his father spoke again with difficulty. He warned that the cousin could not be trusted with the family's future. Aidwale promised he would protect the household from injustice. The chief closed his eyes and seemed calmer than before. Aidwale left the room with determination. Outside, the cousin waited with a hard expression. He said Aidwale's long absence had weakened his claim to leadership. Aidwale answered that blood cannot be replaced by opportunity. The cousin warned that conflict would bring suffering to everyone. Aidwale realized that peace might not be possible without struggle. That night, Aidwale remembered the priest's words about the final test of the heart. He understood that protecting his father might cost him the destiny he had been seeking. Still, he felt that abandoning his family would be a greater failure, and he began to wonder whether a man could fulfill destiny without betraying those who gave him life. Morning came with tension inside the compound because news of Aidwale's return had spread. Servants whispered that the true heir had come back at last. Others feared that open conflict would divide the household. Aidwale understood that hesitation would only strengthen the cousin's control. He prepared himself to act with firmness and fairness. The cousin called a meeting in the courtyard before noon. Relatives and servants gathered to hear what would be said. The cousin spoke first and said the household needed stable leadership during the chief's illness. He claimed that Aidwale had abandoned his responsibilities when he left. Several relatives nodded because they feared uncertainty. Aidwale answered calmly and said leaving home had been part of a necessary journey. He said a man must understand himself before he can guide others. The cousin replied that wisdom does not feed a household. Aidwale said leadership without wisdom destroys families. The people listening began to murmur among themselves. One elder stood up and said the matter must be settled openly. He said the chief's household could not have two leaders at the same time. The cousin agreed and said authority should belong to the person who had remained loyal. Aidwale said loyalty includes returning when a father is in need. The elder said proof must be shown through action rather than words. The cousin proposed that the property should be placed under his control permanently. He said Aidwale's absence proved he cared nothing for inheritance. Aidwale answered that he had never sought wealth for himself. He said the household existed to protect the family, not to enrich one man. The listeners began to see the difference between them. The elder said the chief himself must speak if he was strong enough. Messengers went to the chief's room and returned slowly. They reported that the chief wished to see both men. Aidwale and the cousin entered together and stood beside the bed. The chief looked at them with tired but watchful eyes. Chief Akinwale spoke with difficulty but with clear intention. He said wealth without unity brings destruction to a family. He declared that Aidwale would remain his rightful heir despite his absence. The cousin tried to protest, but the chief raised his hand to silence him. The decision ended the argument, but not the bitterness. Outside the room, the cousin spoke privately to Aidwale. He said the authority gained through weakness would not last long. Aidwale answered that authority built on selfishness collapses by itself. The cousin warned that enemies often rise within families. Aidwale said, justice protects a man better than fear. In the days that followed, Aidwale began restoring order in the compound. He invited dismissed servants to return to their duties. He listened carefully to complaints and corrected unfair treatment. The people began to trust his leadership. Even those who doubted him saw that he acted without pride. Chief Akinwale slowly regained some strength under calmer conditions. One evening he called Aidwale to sit beside him. He said the journey away from home had changed his son. Aidwale answered that hardship had opened his eyes. The chief said he now believed Aidwale was ready for responsibility. Aidwale felt the weight of those words because they reminded him of the shrine. He realized that staying might end the search for his destiny, yet leaving again might reopen his father's suffering. The choice before him seemed heavier than any trial he had faced. He spent the night without sleep. Before sunrise, Aidwale made his decision. He gathered the elders and announced that he would soon leave again. Many people protested because they feared another time of disorder. Aidwale said the household would remain under the guidance of trusted elders. He promised to return when his journey was complete. Later that day, he visited his father and explained his decision. Chief Akinwale listened quietly without interruption. After a long silence, he said a man must follow the path given to him. Aidwale thanked him for understanding. The chief gave him his blessing before he departed. When Aidwale left the compound again, the people watched him with mixed feelings. Some believed he was foolish to leave power behind. Others believed destiny was guiding his steps. Aidwale walked steadily toward the shrine without regret. Still, he wondered what final test remained before his destiny would be revealed. When Aidwale reached the shrine, the priest was already waiting outside, as if he had expected him that very day. Aidwale knelt and greeted him respectfully. Before speaking, he reported everything that had happened since he left, including the sickness of his father and the conflict in the household. The priest listened without interruption and watched his face carefully. When Aidwale finished, the priest nodded as if confirming something he already knew. The priest said Aidwale had passed the final test without realizing it. Aidwale asked what test could be greater than the trials he had already endured. The priest answered that the greatest test is choosing duty when it demands sacrifice. He said Aidwale had protected his father without abandoning the path of destiny. Aidwale listened quietly because he wanted to understand completely. The priest said destiny is not always a distant road. He explained that some men travel far only to discover that their purpose stands near their own homes. Aidwale asked what work had been prepared for his life. The priest answered that he was meant to guide people with fairness and wisdom. Aidwale felt both relief and uncertainty at these words. The priest said Aidwale's journey had prepared him for leadership greater than ordinary inheritance. He said a leader who has known hardship understands the suffering of others. Aidwale remembered the farm work and the long nights of testing. He also remembered the dispute between the brothers and the trouble in his father's house. He began to see how each experience had shaped him. Aidwale asked whether returning home would truly fulfill his destiny. The priest answered that destiny is fulfilled through service and not through wandering. He said Akinwale had learned obedience, patience, and justice through his trials. These qualities would guide his decisions among his people. Akinwale accepted the teaching with gratitude. Before leaving, Akinwale asked why the priest had known his story before meeting him. The priest said the matters of destiny are revealed to those who guard sacred knowledge. He explained that the path of every person is known in part before the journey begins. Akinwale accepted this explanation without further questioning. He felt peace where uncertainty had once troubled him. When Akinwale returned to his father's town, the people welcomed him with respect. They said his journeys had given him wisdom beyond his years. Even those who once doubted him now spoke of him with confidence. Akinwale resumed his place in the household without pride. He focused on restoring fairness wherever it had been lost. Chief Akinwale recovered enough strength to sit outside again. He watched his son settle disputes and guide the household. One day he called Akinwale and said he was ready to hand over responsibility. Akinwale accepted the duty with humility and seriousness. The elders gathered to witness the moment. During the gathering, the chief spoke about the meaning of true wealth. He said, "Riches without wisdom bring confusion to a family." He declared that Akinwale had proven himself through hardship and service. The elders gave their blessings without hesitation. Akinwale accepted leadership as a responsibility rather than a reward. In the years that followed, people came from distant villages seeking his judgment. Akinwale listened patiently before speaking in every matter. He remembered the priests, teaching that justice must stand above pride. Many disputes ended peacefully because of his guidance. His reputation spread far beyond his town. Sometimes young men came asking how they might discover their destiny. Akinwale told them that destiny reveals itself through obedience and service. He said, "A man must first conquer himself before guiding others." Many listened carefully because his words came from experience. His life became an example, repeated by elders. When Chief Akinwale finally died, Akinwale buried him with honor. He remembered the day he had rejected the inheritance before the elders. Now he understood that the rejection had been the beginning of wisdom. The people supported him without division. Peace remained in the household. Even in old age, Akinwale never forgot the shrine beyond the river. From time to time he returned to greet the priest who had guided him. The priest grew older but continued his work quietly. Each visit reminded Akinwale of the road he had walked. Gratitude remained strong within him. People later told the story of the son who refused wealth and later ruled with wisdom. They said destiny does not reveal itself to those who fear hardship. They said a man who listens carefully will find the path meant for him. Parents repeated the story to children who struggled with obedience. The lesson remained alive through generations. And so Akinwale understood at last that destiny had not been hidden from him, but waiting for him to become worthy of it. He had walked away from wealth only to learn how to use it wisely. The trials had shaped his character and strengthened his judgment. In serving his people, he fulfilled the purpose that had called him from the beginning. Thus the son who rejected inheritance became the man who truly deserved it.